Let's get something straight right now. Sonic is awesome! Throughout my time as a casual video game fan, I've always had a preference for Sonic among other platforming mascots because, unlike those characters, Sonic has a tendency to go above and beyond what is usually expected of him by pushing the boundaries of story, characters, and overall presentation. One of the many ways in which the series has done this has been by exploring numerous thematic elements, morals, and messages across each individual game in the series. Things like friendship, bravery, redemption, and more are not uncommon elements in Sonic games, which is more than I can say for most other stories and platformers. These themes have sometimes been subtle, and other times, they've been the main point of the given game's story as a whole. It's stuff like this that makes the Sonic universe so interesting, and it's yet another thing that adds to the series' edgy and progressive nature. Today, in a top 10 requested by Aerobian Angel, I decided to go through my favorite thematic motifs in Sonic games. These are the themes and messages that shine the brightest from a storytelling perspective, the ones that set the best examples for their target audience, and also just the ones that are the most important to me in a general sense. This is Nerdword Entertainment's Top 10 Best Sonic the Hedgehog Motifs and Messages. In Sonic Unleashed, Sonic falls onto, a new friend named Chip, who doesn't remember anything upon their rather impactful meeting. Even though Sonic's got his own problems to deal with now that the world is in pieces and he's just been turned into Hedgehog Teen Wolf, he decides to help Chip out with getting his memories back as they embark on their world-saving adventure together. However, Chip eventually gets his memory back on his own, and discovers that he is the light Gaia force meant to balance out the dark Gaia in the center of the Earth. With all this knowledge now acquired, Chip thanks Sonic for all he's done for him and takes his leave. Sonic responds to this by pulling Chip right back and insisting on helping him out, with his only reason being that Chip is his friend. Loyalty to one's friends is a great message to include in a Sonic game, especially considering just how many friends Sonic has. Also, considering Sonic is mostly aimed at children, I'd say that motifs about friendship and loyalty are perfect for setting an example for this kind of demographic. Sonic might be a cocky, overconfident one-man show, but throughout the Dreamcast era, he was never afraid to ask for help from his friends, and by the time Sonic Heroes rolled around, Sonic was the epitome of a team player. Yes, that's right, people. Number 9 on this list is the real superpower of teamwork. This motif is a philosophy that allows the other Sonic characters to shine equally, because they're working together in harmony in a game that requires you to use everyone for specific purposes. No one is left out, and no one hogs the spotlight for too long. Sonic himself seems like the biggest advocate of the teamwork method here, which is ironic considering just how little he relies on his friends in the more recent games. So I'm sure you've all noticed by now that the Sonic series isn't exactly what you'd call consistent. Nearly every Sonic game since 1994 has been completely different from the last, and some of the less mainstream games have tried out some pretty crazy ideas with the Blue Hedgehog. This, my friends, is called experimentation. It isn't always the healthiest thing for a struggling franchise, but if the risks involved somehow do pay off, they pay off tremendously. I admire the Sonic series for trying new things as often as it does. I think there is room for more consistency in terms of finding a gameplay and presentational approach that works and expanding upon it, but I guess the only way we're gonna get there is by trying, and trying. And I find that highly respectable for what it's worth. It's one of the many things that keeps the Sonic franchise interesting, if not a little scary. The original Sonic the Hedgehog games for the Genesis never exactly had a thematic message, but what they did have was a theme that established the original aesthetical style for the series. And that theme was nature versus industry. Have you ever noticed that every Genesis Sonic game starts off in a lush green world of hills and forests, but then digresses into darker, drearier, more manufactured environments? See, this is one of the things that always made Sonic the anti-Mario to me. Despite common misconceptions about the classic Sonic aesthetic, his worlds are not just colorful stock worlds with nothing but brightness and cheeriness. They're an atmospheric blend of colorful and bleak, due to the damage done by Dr. Eggman's robots. A modern example of this aesthetical theme is present in Sonic Colors, yet ironically enough, this mentality was completely forgotten in the next original game. Figures. I could go on and on for hours about all the reasons why Amy Rose is one of my favorite characters in the series, but I think one of the most important reasons is that Amy is one of the few characters who has a consistent goal to accomplish. Obviously, that goal is to make Sonic respect her, and maybe even fall for her. In the Sonic Adventure games, she is very clear about this desire, and what adds to this is all the things that she does to go after what she wants. Despite being shot down by Sonic in more ways than one, Amy always bounces right back and continues to prove herself as a brave, adventurous, respectable young woman who, while a little crazy, knows how to confidently move toward her goals and ambitions. Perseverance is a human quality I love seeing in my everyday life. The act of refusing to give up is inspiring in of itself, and continuing to find new ways to keep one's head held up high even in the toughest scenarios is even more admirable. If there's one thing that always keeps the soul moving forward, it's a little bit of competition. Throughout the series, Sonic is presented with a number of rivals that challenge his abilities, forcing him to go above and beyond when finding solutions to the problems in his way. With that said, bitter rivalry in the Sonic series has never been more satisfying than with Sonic and Shadow in Sonic Adventure 2. These two continue to push each other's buttons throughout the entire game, and both hedgehogs benefit from it. One of the greatest things about this relationship is that, just like what often happens in real life, these two are so hostile toward one another because they remind each other so much of themselves. The personalities of Shadow and Sonic are two sides of the same coin, and the ways in which these personalities challenge one another is simply glorious. All too often in life, tragic experiences from our past can give us twisted perceptions of our own circumstances in the present. Whether we blame others or ourselves for past incidents, never can we move on without understanding the concept of forgiveness. This is a revelation that Shadow has in one of SA2's final scenes, in which he realizes that his grudge against humanity was all a misunderstanding, and that the wishes of his long-lost friend Maria were actually for him to do his best to protect the people of Earth, rather than exact revenge on them. Previously, Shadow's grudging anger had gotten the better of him, and he had been convinced that Maria wanted nothing but for Shadow to unleash wrath upon the human race. He was only hearing what he wanted to hear, and his memory had been clouded. Only when Amy convinces Shadow that people are basically good and do deserve second chances, does Shadow snap out of his doldrums and remember Maria's true final words to him, thus bringing him to take action against Professor Gerald's resurrected spirit in the form of the Bio-Lizard. It's a character arc sparked by one of the greatest literary messages in existence. Can you tell I love this game's story? Number 3 on this list is what I like to consider the true Sonic spirit. The edgy, youthful, adventurous, carefree essence that makes Sonic who he is, and the essence that I believe should be at the forefront of how the tone of each Sonic game is established. The desire to explore and see new things, the rebellious attitude, the strong friendship dynamics, and the bravery to go up against impossible odds. These are the traits that define Sonic, and this collective spirit is something I feel has been somewhat lost in the past few years, with games that have come across as more safe and less exciting, more cynical and less sincere, more derivative and less original. The exaggerated youthful spirit of the Sonic universe is one of the most important motifs it contains, and I sure hope we haven't seen the last of it. In Sonic and the Black Knight, Sonic must confront the wizard Merlina, whose death anxiety motivates her to seize King Arthur's scabbard and haphazardly attempt to make her world eternal. After a battle with Sonic, she is reminded by him that even though the end is inevitable, we can still make the most of our lives by living them as fully as we can. This is one of the more heartfelt and profound messages in Sonic games, and it's interesting that, of all games, it came out of this spin-off storybook scenario in which Sonic fights the Knights of the Round Table. I'm telling you guys, it all may sound ridiculous, but Sonic and the Black Knight really is a hidden gem, and its presentation of this beautiful and relevant message is a big reason why. Living life to the fullest is a philosophy that should absolutely be put more into practice in the kind of world we live in today, and it only seems fitting for a character like Sonic the Hedgehog to remind us of this philosophy. You guys all know this about me by now. I love Shadow the Hedgehog, but I hate Shadow the Hedgehog. This was a game that all but ruined its title character, while at the same time, however, providing one of his most important revelations, and the greatest motif in Sonic history. Of all of the characters in the Sonic franchise, Shadow is the one with the biggest emphasis on backstory, motivations, and development, as a literary character should have. His story arc has a lot to do with mysterious past events, which I touched on previously, but it also focuses heavily on redemption, and when Shadow is brought back into canon in Sonic Heroes after supposedly dying at the end of Adventure 2, he is a blank slate with no memory of his previous life. However, in his own game, Shadow the Hedgehog, he strives to regain his memory and learn the undiscovered secrets of his past. His desperation to do this takes him down a number of possible paths, with nearly all of them contradicting the original nature of his character. What makes Shadow who he is would be completely lost in a game that was meant to be a celebration of the character. His identity is shattered because he's too focused on sorrow and remorse for previous events, rather than the opportunities lying right in front of him. However, in the very end of the game, in the true final battle against Black Doom, Shadow finally learns to get over himself and do what only he can do in order to stop the Black Comet. He finally decides to leave the past behind him and live his life progressively rather than retroactively. And in the next game, Sonic 06, he has most certainly done just that, now working as an agent for GUN, making the world a better place through his own contributions in the present. This is the sole redeeming factor of Shadow's extended character arc, and the reason I can forgive the rest of Shadow the Hedgehog's story. I myself know all too well how harmful it can be to live in the past. Sometimes we do things we regret, miss out on things we wanted to experience, or wish we could have made more out of the time we once had. These circumstances often influence our outlook on life, but they do not determine who we are. Our identities are defined by how we decide to live our lives and treat others every day in the present, and harping too much on what wasn't or what could have been is only detrimental. In life, we must learn from our mistakes and continue to move on into the future accordingly, trying new things to better our circumstances and keep our lives from becoming stagnant. I believe the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise itself could learn a lot from this mentality. Sonic the Hedgehog is now one of the industry's finest examples of being stuck in the past. These days, the series sees its earliest years as the only ones that were ever redeemable. The quote-unquote classic era of Sonic games was the series Prime, and it seems as though every time the series slips up, it continues to regress further and further based on a falsified memory of what this era was to begin with. Modern Sonic as we know him is the empty shell of what he used to be, because he's unwilling to man up, face his mistakes, and learn from them in progressive ways. Instead, he stays in a fabricated reality of the most superfluous scraps of what he once stood for, forever staying in a safe zone that only serves to make each new adventure even more self-deprecating than the last. That's not to say recent Sonic games have been terrible to play, but I can say without question that Sonic's soul is simply missing. And each nostalgic throwback ironically makes the situation worse. This approach is missing the point, and the only way to keep Sonic alive is to acknowledge the past for what it was, both good and bad, and learn from those experiences by continuing the natural progression of the original presentation philosophy for Sonic, where spectacle and grandeur were prioritized above all else. Celebration of the old days is great, but if that's all you're doing, then what does Sonic even have to celebrate anymore? This year is the 25th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog, and whatever Sega and Sonic Team have up their sleeve will be one of the most important games in Sonic's career. It will determine how we as fans and how the general pop culture community sees Sonic for several more years to come. I've been making Sonic Top 10s for the past 2 years now with the intention of celebrating and bringing attention to all of the presentation aspects that made Sonic my favorite character and franchise to begin with. And I decided to release this list at this time because it is my wish for the next Sonic game to contain the elements and motifs featured here and beyond, delivering a memorable Sonic experience with just the right amount of soul and spirit. This is the ideology I want to start the year off with, because throughout this year, I plan to celebrate Sonic's anniversary by going in-depth about all of the things I love about Sonic, as well as all of the things that I hope and expect for him to improve on in this year's upcoming game. If all goes as planned, 2016 will be packed with some pretty substantial Sonic content from me, because I still have so much to say about him. And yes, this does mean that sometime this year, you guys will finally be receiving the list of my top 10 favorite Sonic games. So many of you have asked for it, and I will deliver when the time is right. So until then guys, I hope you've enjoyed this rather unique top 10. And I hope you can look forward to the oodles of upcoming Sonic stuff I've got coming up next. This has been Brian from Nerdword Entertainment, and I will catch you guys later.